For those of you who were at the OER conference last year, we were in beautiful Yale University at the Beinecke Library. We were serenaded by the Spizwinks, which is the oldest a cappella group, or one of them at Yale. And this year it's Flash Dance, and it's the Golden Gate Bridge, and we're in California. So first of all, I just wanted to join Lisa in welcoming you to this. I think it's like the 7th annual grantee meeting. Cathy and I kind of calculated that. And also really thank Lisa Petrides and her fabulous staff. They have done so much work on putting this together. Amazing job. And also I'd like to acknowledge there are several Hewlett folks here. You know, of course, Vic and Cathy and Leela Bailey, who's our new OER fellow, and Jenny Fong. They're kind of spread around us, but we also are joined by a few other colleagues, two from the education program, Dennis Udall, who's somewhere around here. I can't see him, but I think he's here, and Chris Shear. Also, yeah, there's Chris, a program officer with the education program, and two other colleagues from our QEDC, our Quality Education in Developing Countries Initiative, Lynn Murphy and Dana Schmidt, who are also somewhere amongst you. So we're surrounding you this year. So a little bit about who we are again. We talked about this last year, but it's a very large group. It's the largest group I think we've had yet. Every year we say that, but it's always true because it's getting larger and larger. And a very diverse group. It's actually a more diverse group. More K-12 amongst you than there were last year. It's been, I think, the OER movement weighted a little bit more towards higher ed. This has moved now towards K-12. A little bit more international. I think those figures are up. So we're kind of the changing complexion, I think, of the OER movement itself in some ways, I think, is reflected by the folks participating in this. And for those of you who weren't here before, I think this meeting started again in the Hewlett boardroom. That's the famous kind of history that we're resting on. With this, I think, it's the brilliant brainchild of Mike Smith, who is also somewhere around here. Mike? Yeah, so Sally's doing a good job of pointing out people anyway. And Cathy Casserly, to whom we, I think, all owe a huge round of applause and debt of gratitude. Let's see. So what I was going to do, I think, today was just to kind of lay out. Vic and Cathy are actually going to carry most of the presentation, but I was just going to describe a little bit about what you're going to hear and how we're going to take the next, I don't know, about 40 minutes or so of your time. We were going to start out by just describing very, very briefly what the education program at Hewlett's all about. We're going to move to kind of a state of the union of OER, of the Open Education Resources movement. In 2010, it's our opportunity to look back and see what's actually happened over this past year. And I don't think I'm giving away any secrets to tell you that actually the State of the Union is very, very strong, very sound. The OER movement is really thriving on many different fronts, and we'll sort of describe what that means to us and how we see it. So that's kind of the first piece. But even though it's thriving, of course, there are remaining challenges, and so we'll talk about that as well. Many of them are the persistent challenges we've talked about for a long time, so they are not new, but they remain. And I think the way that we've been thinking about it kind of at Hewlett, kind of the primary challenge is that of kind of coherence. We have a kind of a beautiful garden, or I don't know what the best analogy is. I think of it as beautiful music out there, or notes out there, and we're trying to create a symphony. And so that kind of cohesion around particular topics is something that we'll talk to you a bit more about. We'll also talk to you a little bit more about where Hewlett's headed in 2011, the things that we're funding, the areas that we're particularly interested in supporting. I'm sure that'll be an interesting topic. Then we'll move on to our focus. We mentioned this, I think, for the first time last year, a focus on what we're calling deeper learning. And that is, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but we'll mention where we stand on that, and also particularly where OER fits into that schema. So that's kind of our plan. So sort of moving on to education, just a brief reminder for those of you who either didn't know this or weren't here last year. We have three main components to our work. The first is a focus on California policy, really at kind of changing what's happening, changing the conditions for reform at the state policy level. That's a long-standing interest of the foundation, and it remains a commitment of ours. The second, and you'll hear a lot more about this, so I'm not going to say much more about it, is of course around open educational resources, creating this vibrant ecosystem that you now represent, I think, sort of supporting this work. And the third is on this focus of deeper learning. Deeper learning has a specific meaning in our terms, and I think Vic will describe that. But the way I would describe it is simply to say that it is for us about resetting the expectations for students to a higher set of outcomes that they will need to survive and thrive in the 21st century and to participate in the great debates that we're grappling with right now. We actually see this deeper learning work very much intertwined with our history beforehand and very much building on top, I think, of the work we have done in policy and the work we have done in technology, and sort of this a fabulous, actually, Venn diagram that has that sort of intersection between these outcomes and aspirations for students and the means of getting there. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Cathy Nicholson, who's going to sort of start with a kind of a description of the OER movement.
As many of you know, we've been running a pilot project with Lunametrics to help establish a benchmark for OER web analytics. And we now have year-on-year data for several of those sites, and we're using those as a loose proxy to understand the growth of the field. So in 2010, the number of site visits for 10 of these sites grew from 30.7 million to 38.6 million, which is about a 25.5% increase. The number of languages in which OER were available increased from 130 to 150. And very interestingly, over the for visits from mobile, smartphone, and tablet devices grew from 95,000 to over 300,000, representing the largest growth and with over 200% increase. So we expect to see a lot more of that in the year to come. And these are important metrics that help serve as a proxy for understanding the impact and access to OER, the access to OER. But what we need also, and what we've talked about earlier today and what we'll continue to press on, is understanding and acquiring better metrics for understanding impact of OER in the field. This diagram might look familiar to some of you who attended the meeting last year. We showed this diagram that illustrated that our goal is to transform OER from a centralized, simple ecosystem into a more complex hub and a network of hubs, where there would be many funding organizations so that even if one piece falls out, the movement continues to grow. And over the past 2 years, we've been aiming to create the self-sustaining network. And what do we mean by self-sustaining? Part of that is that there would be multiple funders and multiple sources of other types of support, such as policy support or support and expertise. We see Hewlett transitioning into just one of many hubs in a distributed network of leaders, funders, researchers, and practitioners. And most importantly, we would see that OER becomes institutionalized and really embraced by institutions. And this is primarily happening in higher education, but there's still room to grow in K through 12 as well. So in this past year, we've made continued significant progress along this goal, and that's highlighted by more funders that are entering the OER field in bigger amounts, including the Gates Foundation, the 20 Million Minds Foundation, and the federal government, among many others. We see deeper institutionalization in policy and in organizations. OER has been included as a priority in many federal initiatives, in several UNESCO programs, and nationally, as evidenced by the case with New Zealand and the OER Foundation work. We also see leadership coming from more sources, again, such as Gates with the new Next Generation Learning Challenges, and the Washington State Department of Education, among many others. As we mentioned earlier, web analytics is one way to measure growth of the field, and another metric is funding, by source and by amount. And ideally, we'd like to see a diversity of sources. So after this meeting, we plan to send a short survey to all of our grantees to gather basic funding information about funding sources and the diversity of those sources. And the goal here is to gather data and establish a benchmark to track trends around how the ecosystem is growing. And again, this is just another way to serve as a loose proxy for understanding how OER is moving from the niche into the mainstream. Of course, the primary goal is transitioning OER into an institutional format. So there's been a lot of highlights throughout the past year. First, the Community College Access Project has been launched, which will provide fully open CC BY community college textbooks in 20 core courses. Quality is an important aspect of this project. So the books are being created by the same developers that build textbooks for the major publishers and will be fully competitive in the market. Partnerships is also an important aspect of this project. Connections is working with OLI, which will integrate the content back into their system. They'll redesign it based on their cognitive research and then feed it back into the Connections platform. So they'll be matching OLI courses for many of those textbooks. They're also working with Apple to publish and market these books in the iBook store. This will be a first cognitively validated textbooks in the market, and it will be a cross-platform continuous improvement demonstration of OER. The second element that I wanted to highlight here was the Next Generation Learning Challenge, which we highlighted before. This is a partnership with the Gates Foundation, which is investing $20 million for innovation in community colleges. OER is a core part of this effort and supports fully open CC BY licenses for products developed with grant funds. As I mentioned before, we're seeing greater diversity in the OER marketplace with more startups and business models. Here I'll just highlight a few. Peer-to-Peer University grew exponentially in its first year. They just launched their 4th round of courses where 3,000 people applied and over 1,400 joined. They also have an initial agreement with UC Irvine to offer non-degree continuing education credit for a P2PU psychology course. This is an important first step to blending innovations like this with formal institutions. So you can imagine the possibility here when the Community College Access Project develops integrated, fully open textbooks and courses for the core 20 community college courses, where organizations like P2PU could offer formal institutions a platform and a service to support peer learning around these high-quality OER materials. And this could be an incredibly flexible and highly scalable model to increase access for learners and capacity for institutions that desperately need it. The next example is Ironsoft, which developed a mobile application for an OER, an open courseware for social learning on the go. Their mobile application is integrated into Facebook, and we're excited to see where that may go. Better Lesson is working on a new sustainability model. They have a public lesson sharing website, and they sell their platform to charter schools such as KIPP and the Achievement First, who are encouraged to put their lesson plans under Creative Commons on the public site. And the networks are doing this, and almost all under a CC BY license, while Better Lesson is generating revenue, and they're on their way to sustainability and profitability. The next is an example of Mighty, which is also experimenting with adding advertising from colleges to their Hippocampus site as a possible business model. And finally, Startle launched their first OER business plan competition at the University of Pennsylvania. And we're looking forward to hearing who the winners are in June. We're thrilled to see greater interest in OER from state and federal governments. The core project for California, for example, is working with Achieve to create a new vetting process for digital resources and OER, which will create a path for mainstream adoption. And the 7 biggest districts in California are working on this. And the hope is that because of their size and their influence, that this would become a default model for the state. We're also seeing new OER-friendly policies at the state level in Washington, Virginia, and in Texas. Also, we want to highlight here that the US government recently announced a $2 billion community college training grant fund which is potentially the biggest investment in OER to date. So this is a huge opportunity, if done right, to take OER to another level and really deploy it at scale. Internationally, there are several significant developments as well, and I'll just highlight a few here. The first is that UNESCO is developing an innovative OER platform to offer selected UNESCO resources as openly licensed resources. And the platform is expected to launch by the end of this year, along with a major global campaign promoting OER. Right now, there's an online global OER community that UNESCO has launched. And if you're interested, you can see Abel Kane, who is around here somewhere. Where did he go? To sign up. There he is. In New Zealand, the New Zealand Ministry of Education has provided funding support to the OER Foundation to build a national OER Commons for the secondary sector based on the Learning for Content and the Wiki Educator model. And we're also excited to see the reuse of OER as integrated into the grant-making programs in British Columbia and Canada, where as a condition for their grants, they're focusing funding for credentials and credit-based courses. They're giving preference to OERs developed through multi-institutional partnerships. Those who have won the fund must choose a shareable open license. And then, as stated earlier, funded projects must build in the reuse of existing OER. We wanted to also congratulate Taylor Walsh for publishing Unlocking the Gates, which has achieved the number 32 spot on Amazon in the distance learning category, so congratulations. This book really documents the first stages of OER in the US by looking at higher education efforts, and it's targeted toward administrators, and has already influenced a number of potential large-scale efforts in Texas, Maryland, and New York State. So you can imagine that between the $2 billion grant program, Gates Next Gen Learning Challenges, and the Community Core Access Project, that over the next 3 years, we're going to see a lot more high-quality OER developed than ever, which is fantastic. But of course, the challenges remain. It's still unclear where to put everything, how to tie that learning data back to OER, and how to get feedback on what people are actually using, remixing, and what they're learning from. And that's not just from project-specific data, but across the field overall. And it's really critical to think that, to make the case of how and why OER is so powerful. The risk that we run is that we get siloed resources on individual platforms, and that they're stuck in these institutions where people can't find them and where we can't garner the data on how people are using them, and that we won't be able to demonstrate how and why OER is so powerful. Because it would be a shame, for example, if there were 200 introduction to learning to nursing courses, and that were all wonderful but then stuck in their own institutions. And it would be much better to have 20 fantastic ones where we had the data and where we were able to build off of the data to continue to improve those courses overall. So we're looking to the field to provide leadership here. And we need, again, to reiterate Barbara's point about coherence. How do we provide coherence to all of these projects that are here in the field? And we've had meetings with the Gates Foundation here on this topic, and we really consider this one of the most pressing issues and the biggest issues facing us. So we're looking to the field and to all of you for your guidance, your leadership, and collaboration to make sure that we succeed at these really great opportunities. So with our opportunities, again, we have these challenges, many of them which are not new to us, but we continue to iterate towards solutions on these. So many people still complain that OER is hard to find, and that quality is hard to determine. But if we don't have the metrics to tell us how we're doing, how will we know? So if you look at YouTube and iTunes U, for example, we're succeeding with over tens of millions of downloads. But if you ask teachers if they are using OER, many of them have mixed responses. So to address this, we, along with Creative Commons and Lunametrics, are working to establish a data framework so that we can understand where the challenges are and whether we're making progress or not. In addition, the National Governors Association has released a digital-friendly version of the Common Core standards, and that we hope people will use to align their K-12 materials. The more we use standardized formats, the easier it will be to find them. And then finally, Steve Midgley at the Department of Education, who will be on one of the panels tomorrow, he's developing a very innovative tool called the Learning Registry. It's very lightweight and allows us to begin to centralize and track basic learning data. So I encourage you all to follow up with Steve while you're here at the meeting to learn more about this tool. A great deal of progress has been made on funding sustainable business models for OER, but most of them are still very early stage. We need to figure out how best to help them grow and achieve large-scale success. Once we can demonstrate these large-scale sustainable models, we will have much broader institutional integration of OER. On the research side, currently the research being done on OER is generally driven by the personal interests of the researcher. We don't know whether we're answering the biggest and the most pressing questions. And so we'd like to see research happening in a more organized way. And part of that was the AllNet effort that you saw a little bit earlier to help answer what are the 10 biggest challenges in OER, the 10 biggest questions that we still need to focus our research on, and the 10 biggest obstacles. So this will help us build a body of research and develop feedback loops between researchers and the community. On the policy side, huge strides have been made by just a few people in high places. But we need to make sure OER is a priority for a broad group of policymakers because we want it to remain a consistent priority across administrations. As such, we need a strategy that can be much more persistent and bipartisan. So one way to do this is to keep you in the loop. You can sign up on the OER advocacy list with Reg Lichty, Susan Patrick, or Doug Levin to help keep informed in that area. And again, this is particularly important with the huge opportunity presented by the DOL grant. And finally, we need to continue to find ways to evaluate and signal quality to the field. We have a number of existing ways that we're approaching this. One of them is working with branded institutions for supply. The second is working with large-scale distribution channels such as iTunes and YouTube to see what gets used. The third is doing selective research on learning outcomes to demonstrate learning impact. And finally, the fourth is developing tools and signals such as ratings and the Achieve rubrics across platforms as proxies for quality. So none of these is perfect, as we all know, and we need to continue to work as a field on this challenge. But the closer that we can get to performance against learning outcomes, the better. So that said, Vic will now walk us through our OER portfolio and provide an update on our deeper learning strategy.
So one thing I'm excited to announce is we're launching an OER uniform. Cathy and I coordinated nicely here, and all right. So thank you, Cathy. Cathy really provided a lot of highlights over the year and achievements. And first of all, I'd like to thank you all for your amazing work, leadership, guidance, passion that's making all of this happen out there. And then also highlighting some of the challenges that given these opportunities, they also present challenges and that we need to work on. So I'm going to go over a little bit, thinking forward how Hewlett is implementing some efforts to address some of these challenges, as well as updating our deeper learning strategy, which we rolled out last year. So you may remember, those of you that were here last year, we were talking about crossing the chasm. How do you cross the chasm of innovation and not fall into the valley of whatever, death or whatnot? And the good news is we are in process of crossing the chasm. And I think what we just saw is clear evidence that we are succeeding and making progress. But that said, I don't think we're quite to the other side. One of the frames that we talk about is mainstreaming. Once OER is embedded in government policies, in educational institutions, in commercial markets, and it's really in the mainstream, that's probably the strongest and best way to be sustainable, adaptive, and a growing ecosystem. I think one of the simplest ways to get to that point is that when we're talking with large influential institutions or people or groups that are working in education, that the question isn't why should we do open, but why aren't we doing open? Once you do that, you flip from a supply side push to a demand side pull, and that's a much easier way to grow and scale and sustain. So, over this past year, we decided to look into, so what does it really mean to be mainstream, and how would you actually approach that? And where do we need to focus? And we came up with 5 areas which we're focusing on that we think are critical to really succeed. The first area is high-quality supply. This is basically going after, if you want to be consumed and used and part of the mainstream formal institutions, we need to think about kind of polished products that are developed in ways that the systems can consume, reuse, and grow those resources. So this was part of the impetus of the Community College Access Project, to really create basal content that's fully license cleared, that's designed as textbooks. And even though textbooks may be a bit old school, in many ways, it serves as a Trojan horse. It's a way that you can sell, distribute in bookstores, professors are familiar with it, learners are familiar with it, and then they're in there, and then they get simulations, they get links to the online courses that are integrated with OLI as well as tons of other OER, and it's almost this Trojan horse that can kind of open up that entire world. But it's an interface into the formal system that is the mainstream of education right now. And on the K-12 side, it's a bit different on how you approach this. It's similar concepts. The pro here is that you have standards and the Common Core standards, and we're choosing to really focus in on that. That provides an opportunity as it kind of unifies the mainstream market. You don't have to come up with 50 versions of everything. But at the same time, the K-12 systems aren't very digital friendly right now, and the curriculum adoption process is very political. And actually in our deeper learning strategy, we looked at the possibility of maybe going and funding open curriculum for deeper learning and growing that. And when we did that analysis, it came back that curriculum costs $3 to $5 million per grade per subject, and that's without any adoption or any of the process to get it into the system. So we said, well, that's not quite feasible from where we are. So we're looking at innovative ways. I think one of the things that we're doing is focusing on the Common Core, the opportunity that presents. Districts and states are looking for curriculum that aligns to that, but taking a very sort of modular approach. So components that are tied to those learning standards, but you can embed in many different contexts. Probably the leading example here is the PhET science simulations, which have been developed. They're excellent, and now last year they passed 15 million simulations run, translated into 40 languages, and they're really proliferating both in for-profit. Pearson's just embedding them in their textbooks and homework platforms, nonprofit, and across the entire institution. Another great example is Khan Academy, and you see these modular videos that can be used, reused, remixed in very different contexts, but you tie them to the standards and into this kind of coherent framework. So we're looking at supporting efforts similar to that. Second area is supportive policies. Last year at Yale, we rolled out our advocacy effort, and Susan Patrick, Reg Lichty, and Doug Levin are heading that up. That's continuing, looking at advocating for OER both at the federal and state level, working with state policies to figure out how to open them up, make them more digital friendly. And then even at the district level, as Cathy mentioned, we're working with the 7 largest districts in California to try and test out with Achieve common rubrics and processes that districts can bring in digital resources and use them more in their formal institution and not just ad hoc by teachers here and there. Third area is implementable standards. There are a couple of areas that standards are important, and we're working with groups like Creative Commons for interoperability standards to continue to address some of those challenges. There's learning standards. So for example, the National Governors Association rolling out some digital friendly Common Core standards. And even as a field, I think that's an area that we have a challenge, is how do we as a field think about learning outcomes and manage those in a somewhat coherent manner? Because unless you anchor things in the learning outcomes, it's very difficult to assess in such a diverse field what improvement we're making on those learning outcomes. Third area is accessibility, that we're funding a lot of standards work and development. And fourth is the quality, which Cathy spoke about the Achieve rubric and some of the different ways we're looking at trying to track and improve how we measure quality across OER. Fourth area is influential research. And here we're really trying to focus in on teasing out what's different about open. What is that value proposition, and making that as crisp as possible. Open often gets blended in with E and digital, and a lot of the projects and research out there just kind of meshes it all together. I think one great example is David Wiley and his work, where he's actually taking open textbooks. He's gotten a number of classrooms in Utah, formal classrooms, that are taking out the proprietary textbooks. They're putting in open textbooks. One of the early things that happened when he was doing the professional development around it was the teacher said, oh, these are only $10? Oh, that means suddenly we can mark them up. Students can highlight them. Students can do a lot of the study skill stuff that we teach them. They can keep them, and it kind of changes the dynamic in the classroom a bit. But the great part is that he has access to the state assessment data for those classes. So he'll also be able to do some analysis on, does this impact learning outcomes or not? And it may or may not, we don't know, but it could come out that we have to tease out as OER something about efficiency, is it about productivity, is it about learning, and actually getting the data so we can make those claims and really back them up. And the last area is opportunistic innovation. As many of you know, OER is very much about enabling innovation. It's about breaking down silos, working cross disciplines, cross groups, and coming up with new ways of doing things. And so we're still selectively looking at innovative new models that we think provide promise for really transforming the way various aspects of education and learning happen. Examples there are Peer-to-Peer University and the work that they're doing, as well as Gulf of Maine Research Institute with their open participatory science learning platform, which is being used statewide in Maine for students to be citizen scientists. And then just to touch on globally, I think one of the challenges that we always face, and I joke about my portfolio, is yes, I limit my scale to K through life global. And so it's very big, and there's a lot to do, and Hewlett's a big foundation, but when you put it in that context, we're very small. And so we are working more at a policy level and looking to help support and influence and raise the profile of OER among NGOs, cross-national NGOs, as well as governments, and trying to really figure out how to leverage resources and increase the amount of resources and capital that are available for OER on a global scale. So with that, I'd love to announce that we are releasing a draft version of an OER Whitepaper, which is the result from this work. And I say draft because the last step that we need help on is feedback from all of you. We will be sending out a link on this, and we invite you to feedback, comment, and take a look through it. I think I'm not going to jump through this, but this is kind of what we call our logic model and the outcomes that we're focusing on around these areas to get to this goal of mainstream large-scale adoption. And I think one of the areas that we're especially looking, and I know we're hammering this home, is where we're looking for help is metrics. And I think on a couple of levels to think about that. One is based on how do we track spread and reach, but then also depth. How do we track learning? How do we do that in a distributed fashion? And I think we need to be creative. I think there's an opportunity to be creative. Right now, to be honest, much of learning assessment is, I think, relatively conservative. And with the web, we can get a lot of behavioral data. Maybe there's some research to tie behavioral data as proxies as learning gains. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into our deeper learning strategy. Last year, we announced this at Yale, and this has been our first year of large-scale grant making in this area. So as Barbara mentioned, deeper learning is a set of skills and competencies that we found are critical for the success of students to persist in college, to have better economic attainment and outcomes, and to be strong civic participants. This is a domestic strategy that we're focused on in the US. And as I jump into this, I think one thing that we feel is that the current system is very focused on basic skills. It's what we're assessing, it's what we're incentivizing. And that's not enough. And it's pretty clear. We have lots of data that that's not enough as well. And so we need to really raise the bar, and we think this is a unique opportunity to be able to influence this. One thing about deeper learning is that it's not necessarily a whole new set of skills. It's actually relatively old concepts that can date back to Dewey or even Socrates and Plato probably. But we think that there's a unique opportunity. The federal government is providing leadership with new assessments. We feel that technology is reaching a point where it's affordable and can help drive and promote deeper learning, and as well as the work with the Common Core standards, which we feel embody deeper learning, allows us to really address this at a national level. So with that, deeper learning, just a review from last year. There's 3 areas. First is content knowledge. So students need to learn and master core content knowledge and be able to apply it to novel situations and contexts. 2 are cognitive strategies, which include critical thinking, problem solving, and communicating effectively. And 3rd are learning behaviors. So this is working collaboratively and either metacognition or learning how to learn. And this is the core suite of what we're defining as deeper learning. And as I said, it's nothing totally new, but what is new is the opportunity that stands in front of us. So we talked about last year, we have the 3 Ps, which is how we're going at this: policy, practice, and proof points. On the policy end, we've started this year with supporting both federal assessment consortia. This is $350 million that are to redesign the assessments that are used nationally and especially for accountability. We're supporting them to help go as far as they can on the deeper learning spectrum and basically be as innovative and progressive as possible to get at these outcomes along with the core basic skills which need to be assessed. We're also working with the Alliance for Excellent Education and Bob Wise to help support advocacy and promotion at the federal level. And we're also working with states on their adoption policies and looking at ways to promote deeper learning at that level. So the second area is practice. Practice is basically how do you do this at scale? How do you do this for millions of students? How do you do it for hundreds of thousands? How do you support hundreds of thousands of teachers? I think we have models of how to do this in small pockets, but it is challenging to do this at large scale. This will be a very technology-focused portfolio, working both in K-12 and community colleges, and it includes things like the actual implementation of assessments, both summative and formative. It includes curriculum, professional development, as well as innovative digital learning environments. So there, we've made some investments in an open learning management system from the New Tech Network, which Chris Walsh, who's here, they developed an Echo platform, and that's open source and being released. We supported an open item assessment bank design phase, where it'll be an open platform where people can put formative assessment items, and then even we'll be planning on seeding that with deeper learning, focused and validated, kind of best of breed, formative assessment items. And then on the curriculum and professional development area, we're still doing strategy. We're actually scanning the markets, kind of seeing how these are challenging areas to really work. What are the big institutions and what are the ways that we can promote deeper learning in those areas? And then on digital learning environments, this is where one of our current grantees here at OER is doing some great work, where we just, actually last week, launched a grant to Gulf of Maine Research Institute to take our deeper learning rubric and see how can you evaluate digital learning environments for deeper learning. And then the last group is Proofpoints. And this is a group, a national network of exemplary schools and community colleges that best embody deeper learning and have been doing this for many years. We have a number of those here. I see Larry Rosenstock in the back. Larry Rosenstock's from High Tech High in San Diego. Bob Lenz is here from Envision Schools, among a number of other schools that are working on this. The goal here is to have places where we can point to and say, this is what deeper learning looks like, and to show that it's possible for all students, and that it's not just meant for suburban wealthy schools, and that these people are tackling some of the hardest places and promoting deeper learning and showing how it is critical and it does make a difference for these kids. And then it also is where we're doing research and helping determine what are the best practices, what are the key things to be able to deliver deeper learning. And this may even inform some of our practice bucket to think about how do we then integrate that at a larger scale. So, given this Venn diagram, probably the most interesting part is the middle. how can OER promote deeper learning goals? And so we've made some investments here, and I'd like to share those as examples. I've mentioned a few of them already. So one is we supported PISA for schools. This was part of our summative assessment strategy. And so PISA is the international exam, along with TIMSS. PISA is very focused on critical thinking and problem solving and represents deeper learning quite well. And traditionally, it's a national test. And so they came to us, and they wanted to design a version that was where you're able to administer this either at a school or district or a state level. And so they're now developing that. And one great thing that OECD has agreed to is they will be releasing those test items under Creative Commons Attribution Only license, which is wonderful for the assessment field to have access to that and be able to use that in many creative and interesting contexts. As I mentioned, we supported New Schools Venture Fund to explore an open formative assessment item bank, which is currently in an initial design phase, and we're also looking at a number of other formative assessment platforms. The open source learning management system from New Tech Network, ECHO, and then on the policy level, a lot of the work blends in with promoting deeper learning, but also creating digital-friendly state level and district level adoption policies. So, with that, we've had an amazing year. We should all be thrilled with the opportunities that are in front of us. I think a great analogy is that the door is open, and the challenge now is we really have to walk through it and execute. And to that, to drive home this message of coherence and really thinking about how can we all work together so that we're building off of each other so that there really is that synergy that makes OER much greater than just the individual projects. And so that's something that we hope to both work with you on and incentivize, and that we are looking for and promoting is these cross-project, cross-platform, larger scale efforts. All right, so we'll pause and open it up. How do we have? We only have time for probably about 2 questions, but we would encourage you. Oh yeah, apologize. I mean, we can go around a little bit, but we'll also encourage you to please come up to us with questions as well. We recognize that there's a little bit of a time crunch with how the lunch and everything worked out. So,
you mentioned Proofpoints. Do you have grand plans to have them in a gallery somewhere so the universe can see them?
That's actually a very good question. We are actually working on an interesting project that was brought to us by a couple of the members of the network, which is the Museum or Collaboratory of Great Student Work, where they would be publishing their student work actually and create an interesting environment to really highlight and showcase the things that kids can do in these amazing environments, and even tie that to the Common Core to say, hey, look, this is how the Common Core can really incentivize this improved quality of education. At an individual school level, I think I would have to defer to Barbara. I think we have the network together and we're operating. I think we're still developing exactly how we're going to showcase and communicate out and broaden the impact. But the goal is to basically really raise this and put a spotlight on it and have more, I guess, more presence in the national conversation from these institutions.
So that was very helpful to hear all that, and I'm wondering if all of the good analysis all the good information you've collected could be mixed with the OLNet analysis, and we could get a nice visual concept map up on the web or something that's visual that folks who when we are trying to help bring new participants into the OER ecosystem, we can point at it and say, here's where you can go for an understanding of where all the players are, where the policies are, where the examples are, where the best practices. And most important, if you want to contribute and play, we can easily see where the gaps are. So here are the next big questions that need to be asked. Here's the work that hasn't been done but needs to be done. And so if you want to put time, money, resources in, this is where you can play and be the most helpful.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And I'll touch on that, and if you, so part of the OLNet mapping project was actually to address and summarize a list of all of these challenges and themes that we're seeing in the work in a visual way. So if you go into the map, and you can actually click on things and resort things by organization, by project, by themes, by questions. So you can do that in a visual way. So, and the idea for that is that people will continue to contribute to it so that it's actually a living map. It's not a static thing that goes out of date tomorrow, right? It's something that everyone here can contribute to, that you can tell other people about, and that they can also contribute to this map and use it as a way to communicate visually what's going on in the field and where the different challenges and opportunities are.
It's a two-part question. You talked about the emergence of enterprise models, and I wondered if you could share a few words about the most promising emerging strategies you're seeing in the K-12 and higher ed. And then I wanted to pose a question from the enterprise model point of view about whether you thought, in the way that Carl Wyman has allowed his innovation to really affect spaces that would not be thought to be open to innovation. Have you thought about concerted strategies for, as an enterprise model, infecting commercial providers with open access, provided that could be a non-exclusive arrangement? I realize that was a five-part question.
I'll touch on it briefly. I think so. Yeah, I think right now the most crystal clear model is the better lesson model, where they're charging for their platform, and that's the value that they're providing. But the OER is actually a positive externality. That's not the core piece of what they're charging for, and so they're able to generate KIP branded, Achievement First branded lesson plans, which is very valuable under very open licenses. But they're able to basically monetize their platform. So that's, I think, one of the best. There's a lot of startups now that are popping up and dancing around with different models. But as we mentioned, they're relatively early stage and less proven out on where they are with some of that. I think in terms of a concerted effort, yes, I think we haven't engaged the groups as much. We've engaged some publishers, including Scholastic, who's here, has been wonderful, and among a few others. One thing we are encouraging is CC BY license, and even with FET, we talked to them, and as we analyzed it, we said, your mission is to have as many students as possible go through the learning experience of your simulation, in which case, if Pearson's and others picks those up, they can get it to millions more, which you don't have that infrastructure, you're not going to build that infrastructure, and you're improving their products in the process, right? So we believe very much in that kind of a model and are figuring out ways to do that at an infrastructure level that does mean actually CC BY allows that. The other licenses do tend to restrict. We don't see much commercial pickup of share alike, and of course if there's a non-commercial restriction on it. So that is one way we're doing that. So with that, we do have two more slides very quickly. Just to highlight, summarize what you can do. One is link to each other's projects. How do we work together and cohere across projects and across the ecosystem? Two is comment on our white paper. We're really looking for your feedback and guidance and observations from the field around that. Specifically the metrics piece. That's where we really need a lot of help and think there's a lot of open space for innovation, in which case a crowdsourcing model really helps us. And then send us evidence of impact that's actually supported by data. I think we're very good at collecting lots of anecdotes and stories, and they're very powerful and wonderful, and qualitative research is very good. Where we're lacking is on the hard data side of things. And again, as close as we can get to learning, the better. And then Cathy will end with what everyone loves to look for, additional grant opportunities.
So there's some other grant opportunities that we wanted to make everyone aware of. The first one, the first two are here in the United States. One is the Department of Labor. The Federal Departments of Labor and Education recently announced the rollout of $2 billion in grants over the next 4 years, including the development of open courses for community colleges. And the grant requirements, yeah, that's a huge deal. Grant requirements stipulate all materials must be released under a fully open Creative Commons attribution-only license. So that's a great opportunity. The second one is the Next Generation Learning Challenges. Again, this is a $20 million grant program co-funded with the Gates Foundation. It seeks to increase deeper learning and raise college readiness for community colleges and through K-12, and completion rates among low-income young adults. This will identify technological and OER solutions to these barriers that the students face and encourage broad-scale adoption of those solutions. The next two are international. One of them is through the Shuttleworth Foundation, and they have Shuttleworth Foundation fellowships for individuals with innovative ideas for social change. And they're most interested in ideas with a strong component of openness that are at the intersection between knowledge and learning and technology. And finally, the HP Catalyst Initiative has recently announced a request for proposals. And this is a global network of thought-leading educators who are exploring innovations in science, technology, engineering, and math, learning and teaching. So for 2011, they're seeking to fund 20 new organizations to join a consortium. And the grants will be, the selected organization will receive more than $150,000 in technology, cash, and professional services. So again, we just wanted to make you aware of those other opportunities. With that, and Barbara has a note.
I just wanted to reiterate something Vic said, which is to thank everyone here for, for everything that you do. It's actually, you are what made this possible. You're sort of, we think of you as kind of the vanguard of the revolution, and we're just super happy, proud to be part of marching alongside of you. So thank you.